So I'll introduce myself. My name is Andrea Schuhmann. I am a biologist with the USGS Fort Collins Science Center up north here in Colorado. I'm also the technical outreach coordinator for the North American Bat Monitoring Program. So NABat, which you'll hear me refer to, is a collaborative conservation monitoring program, and I work in partnership with scientists, researchers, land managers, and bat enthusiasts from all across North America. And what we're doing is we're collectively working together to better understand the status and trends of bats and bat populations here in North America. So I'll be presenting on how NABat is helping us all to leverage data from transportation structures that we collect on bats so that we can use that information to manage for bats and conserve them. Okay, quick show of hands here in the audience. Who is familiar with NABat other than what you've heard today? Okay, good. Good, a little over half, so that's great. So for a little background to get us started, the North American Bat Monitoring Program, or NABat, is a partner-driven, multi-agency international bat monitoring program. And our primary goals or aims are to increase the quantity and the quality of data that we have on North American bats, to make those data discoverable so that we can use them to address some really critical bat conservation problems and management needs. One of those being how do we respond to some of the threats bats face, like white nose syndrome or mortality due to wind energy and for other reasons. And then lastly, to use these data to provide regular updates on the status and trends of North American bats, because as Trina had mentioned, we've been doing it for birds for a really long time. We need it for bats too, right? So no single method is adequate for detecting or monitoring all of the bat species we track. If you think about it, they're busy at night. They vocalize in the ultrasonic, and they like to hide in dark, hard to get to spaces. So they can be the bird people have it really easy. Nothing against bird people, but they can be really rather difficult at a baseline to understand, right? And so we use all these different methods to assess and monitor bats. And no one method is ideal for all species, right? And so we rely on internal roost counts, where you're going inside the roost to count individuals when you can find a roost, right? Sometimes we rely on emergence counts, where we're counting individuals as they're exiting a roost. And then we also rely very heavily on acoustics. And so that's where we're either deploying a detector on the landscape that's built to record the ultrasonic vocalizations of bats, and then specialized software can be used to identify those two species. And that can either be deployed, the detector on the landscape, or it can be placed on a vehicle. And so we can do what are called mobile transects to monitor bats. And then lastly, actually capturing the bats in hand through a variety of different techniques, mist nets, harp traps, all sorts of other things. So all of those methods provide us with really critical data. So thanks to Bat Conservation International, you'll see this great little video in the background. But hopefully all of us here recognize that bats are absolutely essential members of healthy, functioning ecosystems, including urban ecosystems, right? And they provide critical ecosystem services like pest control, pollination, and seed dispersal. They also provide us with enormous economic benefits to urban and rural economies. And here in the United States, especially in relation to bridges, they can help drive ecotourism dollars for local communities. So one prominent example of this is here at the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas. If you haven't been, I highly encourage you to. It's amazing. And so this week's conference recognizes the influence and impact that transportation infrastructure can have on wildlife and wild places. And so today, myself, as well as the rest of us across these sessions, are sharing how plans to improve aging infrastructure provides us with really, really important opportunities to work together to start to get a better understanding of how bats and bat populations are tied to, and in some instances are relying on transportation structures. Sorry, I don't know what all those pictures are. We're going to go through there real quick. Okay, so as Trina Morris mentioned in her presentation, in 2023, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies shared their first ever bat resolution that encouraged collaboration among state, federal, tribal, provincial agencies, and that emphasized that collaboration to understand bats at transportation structures, but also emphasized the value of having standardized approaches to collecting data and then submitting data ideally to a central repository, being the North American Bat Monitoring Program. So transportation structures, as we all know, can serve as important habitat for bats, including federally listed species. And so prior to structural maintenance or demolition projects, knowing whether or not bats are present on the landscape or using these structures helps to ensure that statutory as well as regulatory responsibilities are met, right? But it conserves the bats and their habitat while also keeping projects moving forward. So really hitting the sweet spot of a lot of those needs. So Trina had shown this briefly. We worked with AFWA and other partners with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other transportation liaisons to support the passage of the AFWA resolution with this guidance document. And this guidance document was basically helping practitioners to understand the very basics of assessing structures and the general process and approach. And then once you have the data, what do you do with it? And how can you make that data available so others can use it too? Sorry, I'm doing a time check. We're good. Okay. So March of 2024 was the first time that U.S. ESA, Endangered Species Federal Guidelines, explicitly included assessment of transportation structures for guidelines related to the northern long-eared bat and the Indiana bat, as Suma Lee and others have mentioned. And you'll hear us often refer to Appendix K. Sorry, we need a better name for that. That's terrible. Appendix K of the survey guidelines describes, in particular, how to determine if Indiana bats and northern long-eared bats, as well as tricolor bats, are using bridges and culverts. So that was huge, and it provided really valuable guidance for practitioners. Included in the guidance is this really grainy form. It looks much better up close in person, but it's jam-packed with information, a really intense, right, form within the guidelines that suggested for use to collect information about bats using transportation structures. And the nice thing about this form is it hits all the key information needs that Fish and Wildlife Service has for their purposes. And so we were notified of this, and we've been in collaboration with the Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as AFWA, recognizing that a lot of states are collecting transportation data, but they're doing it in these very isolated situations. And so they might be collecting that data that they then report to other state agencies or to Fish and Wildlife Service or across municipalities. So consistently, duplication of effort or these data going to live in an isolated database are occurring across the country. And so what happens is we recognize that bats don't stop at boundaries, right? They don't stop at these jurisdictional boundaries that we've created. And so information that one state or one locality is learning about bat use of transportation structures, when it goes to live in a solitary database, it's not providing really valuable information across those boundaries. And so that's where NABat comes in as serving as the central repository, not only for this transportation related data, but all that other data related to captures and stationary acoustics. So we can start to leverage this information and get a better sense of where we see these trends in use relative to bats' ranges, but also the regions within their ranges. So we have been working with Fish and Wildlife Service and other partners across the network to develop a brand new transportation data template. And this template allows the ingest of not only bat-related data, but also the critical metadata related to the transportation structures. So as Trina had mentioned, we've always allowed people to submit data when people observe bats roosting in bridges and culverts, but now we're providing the opportunity for people to tie directly the transportation structure data so that we can start to analyze more information about what structures are used, where, what species are involved, and when use is occurring. So we are in the final stages just this week of testing our new transportation data template. And when finalized, registered users will be able to upload, view, and interact with their own transportation data, as well as access through third-party data requests and general public views, transportation data that's been submitted by others. So as I had said before, when those transportation data are submitted to NABat, they are being leveraged with over 120 million other data records that are currently in existence in NABat. So there is really a great amount of power there in leveraging it with our other survey types. So information about bat use for transportation infrastructure already exists, as I said, but we're lacking that detail on transportation structures themselves, which is why we're improving this data upload process. So as you can see here, this is just for the United States, the contiguous United States, internal roost counts that we have. We have pretty good spread. We've got some pockets of the US where we've got limited data. And then here you can see our emergence counts. These are much more difficult to do, and so we have much more limited data for emergence counts. But if we start to zoom in on transportation specific information that we have, green being internal roost counts and pink being emergence counts, we can see, way to go, southeastern United States, a lot of really valuable information. The bulk of the data that we're getting is from these efforts across the Southeast, right? And you can see these nice lines where it's tracking along major interstates and roadways. So imagine if we can start to move that beyond the Southeast to efforts across the US as well as into Canada. And so no shade on the West, right? But this is the Western United States, but also notice we don't have to the degree that federal nexus of listed species that are pushing that information collection. So just based on the data that we currently have, still skewed toward the southeastern United States, The vast majority of counts come from southeastern myotis, Myotis austroriparius, but then we also get little brown bats and Yuma myotis, which can be difficult to disambiguate even by sight. And so those are often reported as a couplet together. Faith will get into here in her talk in the second session how important genetics can be for when we have these roosts of ambiguous species, for disambiguating who's actually using those. Regarding our emergence counts, we have the vast majority are Mexican free-tailed bats, which I'm not even showing you here because we have well over 300,000 reported in the database. But it just shows the next highest number of counts come from bat, but no ID. So once again, the critical importance of using other techniques like genetics to determine what species are present during emergence counts of these structures. Okay. So aside from informing what we know about bat use, of transportation structures, why is having these data in NABat so critical? Well, they can be, just to say again, they can be leveraged with what we collectively understand about bat use of transportation structures range-wide, right? So not just at the state level, but at the range-wide level for these species. And the bounds of what we know doesn't need to stop at those jurisdictional boundaries. So some localities or organizations that have limited capacity can actually benefit by the efforts of others. These data are aligned with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service information needs, and therefore they can be shared with Fish and Wildlife Service for consultation and compliance purposes. And then lastly, these data can be leveraged with other data types that I had mentioned before, like acoustics, capture records, etc., so that we can really improve our understanding of how bats are doing and how they're faring through time. Okay, so we've got 1 minute for questions. I'm going to cut it off there for myself. I'm going to skip ahead real quick. So you can follow these QR codes to sign up for our newsletter or our COP call. Please feel free to shoot me an email if your state is interested in sharing information and sharing your data with NABat. So thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks, Andrea. I was curious, when you talk about the partnerships and successful collaboration, what experience or what role do you see for the NGO community in this space, and what are some things that we can do to support these efforts?
Yes, and that's a great question. May I ask, are you with an NGO?
I am.
And what NGO are you with?
Defenders of Wildlife. Defenders
of Wildlife. Great, thank you for your question. And so, especially in this moment right now, I'm getting chills saying it. As a member of a federal agency, it is more important now than ever that we lean heavily on our NGOs and our states to help continue forward with the not only NABat's collaborative conservation effort, but others that are taking place across the country, across the globe, right? And so part of that could be by helping to reach out to partners to recognize the importance of these efforts and contributing data to these efforts. And in some cases, potentially even finding future homes, potentially outside of the federal government for these efforts. But I did want to just emphasize that NABat, even though we are currently coordinated by the USGS, it is not owned by the USGS. We are a collaborative network of thousands of users and hundreds of organizations, both governmental and non-governmental. So thank you very much for that question. Okay, so I know I'm keeping folks from coffee. So we've got a coffee break from 10:30 to 10:50. And I encourage you again to join us for our second session on bats here at 10:50. So thank you all very much.